All right, so basically, the simulation, as we're going to see, is effectively trying to emulate the process flow of what managers does. And so the introduction to business, the game, is a simulation that essentially allows you to manage, allows you to get hands-on experiencing in managing a company, tries to give you some real-world experiences through a simulated environment, allows you to have a sandbox to basically play with, and so on. And the real purpose behind simulations is to prepare you for certain functions and certain operations. And so specifically in the case of Introduction to Business, the game, its purpose is to emulate being a manager. Now, what is it that a manager does? Well, a manager essentially monitors a series of measures and metrics. You're driving your automobile, you're managing your automobile, you're steering it, which is looking at the measures and metrics. You're looking at your gas tank to make sure that you have enough fuel to continue your travels. You're looking at traffic lights and many other elements. So you're monitoring measures and metrics. If, for example, someone cuts in front of you, you manage by putting your foot on the brake. So basically, we as managers monitor a series of measures and metrics, and then depending upon what it is we see, we manage. That is, we make a series of choices, decisions that allow us to manipulate what it is we're doing. That's what the simulation is going to give you the opportunity to essentially manage a business. In addition to that, one of the most important aspects of management are milestones, due dates. We as managers in the real world, in the business world, have to meet certain due dates, certain obligations, certain responsibility. As you'll see, the quarterly processing are the milestones you are going to have to prepare yourself for. And this brings into play the area of responsibility, which is why we're managers, we're responsible for something, and thus being held accountable for those decisions. So the simulation attempts to emulate this in a friendly environment without any real risk in terms of monetary risk, career risk, branding, or anything else associated with. And that's really why simulations are used in academia, the business world, military environment, in sciences, to essentially get an understanding of what is going on. Specifically, in our simulation, we're looking at selling products into markets. Well, what exactly is a market? Well, very simply and quickly, a market is made up of customers, a population. A market is made up of customers who desire certain characteristics in the product, that is, needs to be satisfied, which we call value proposition. Customers in a certain market are interested in a price, and customers in a certain market have choices, that is, competitors of yours. They can purchase many different products. You can buy a Chevrolet, you can buy a Ford, you can buy a Nissan. So the key behind it is the simulation emulates a market which has a population size, emulates the value to that market, which is what is important to them, emulates the desired price, and allows you to compete with each and every one of your classmates. And now, what is it that you are doing into these markets? Well, you're selling, if you will, your product. Now, what is the product that you're selling? Well, in this case here, your product is made up of a series of features. You can have, as we'll see, up to 5 features in a product. Each feature has a certain value to the market, which is the value proposition. Each feature has a recommended price and cost, which gives you something that's very important in business called gross margin. So the idea behind it is when you create your product, you're creating it to satisfy the needs of this market and at a price point this market is willing to pay. Now, the market doesn't know who you are. So therefore, the second part of your managerial process is to promote the product. Promotions makes the customer aware that you have a product. That awareness is important because if the customer doesn't know you exist, they can't even consider buying your product. In addition to that, you also have to be concerned about excess inventory. We all know the problems of having inventory beyond the life of the product itself. And so therefore, we have to make sure we manage our inventory. And then lastly, every company has human resources, people that work for it. And as a result, these individuals are going to help and improve the company, improve the revenues, improve the costs, that is in terms of reductions and so on. Now, in addition to that, you have all these competitors, and these competitors are all trying to do the same thing. So basically what the simulation is emulating is a series of products being sold into a particular market, and you are the manager of that product, encompassing the capability, features, and design of the product, and the promotion, marketing, inventory, and forecasting of all those different elements. So to go through that, to emulate and simulate this environment, you create your account into the simulation, and you then proceed to make a series of decisions. Now, this is also shown on the website and in some of the videos that you'll see on the student training, so I won't labor us through each and every one of the points in here. But basically, the most important one that we can see is in terms of immersion. You are immersed, you're given a hands-on experience to simulate what it is to be a manager and to simulate competition without ever having to become involved in the economic risks associated with doing so. And thus you have what we call a sandbox. And a sandbox allows you to essentially experiment, allows you to view what is going on. And therefore, you have an opportunity. And again, many of the other elements that are shown here too, gives you insight, gives you some experience in what you're being taught by Dr. Laskowski, and so on in your class. These are some of the concepts that are in the simulation itself. Now, some of these terms may be new to you. I recommend that you look at the glossary of terms that are employed in the game so you become familiar with them. Many of these terms will become clear to you as you progress through your semester in the Introduction to Business course, and you'll become clear on what exactly they mean. But very quickly, we have our marketing 4 Ps, or I like to call it 7 Ps, which includes packaging, product name, and projections. We have the value proposition. Most importantly, we design a product. What is its value? What is the need it's satisfying to the potential customer it's selling to? And so on. We have market niches. We have pure competitive markets. We have niches. We have concentrated markets, duopolies, monopolies. These are all elements that you're going to discuss throughout the semester. Projecting how many units are going to be sold. Managing, if you will, cash flow. Collecting the data. You have an export capability in the simulation to allow you to export information from the simulation into your Excel spreadsheet and then perform all sorts of analyses on it. And then, most importantly, as we've discussed, you have the ability to monitor a set of measures and metrics and manage. And it's very quick and easy to remember this concept of managing and monitoring, managing measures and metrics. Just think of M&Ms. So you're monitoring a series of measures and metrics, M&Ms, and you're managing M&M. So the idea is the simulation very quickly, overview, goes through these various concepts in the sim itself. Now here is, again, another perspective, view on what these capabilities are, your design of the product, inventory management, a cost versus price analysis, that is your gross margin, cash flow, as we all know, cash is king, the 7 Ps, gap analysis, and so on. So as you look through the various videos that are on the website, and as you progress through the simulation, a lot of these concepts will become much clearer because you're starting to manage. And that really is the purpose of the simulation, is to provide you, if you will, a sandbox in which you experiment with your managerial skills and capabilities. A simulation is very simple. Your first step is performing what is called due diligence. That is analyzing the information. That is the monitoring component. You're monitoring a series of measures and metrics. Once you've analyzed the environment, your product position in this quarter relative to all your competitors in the various markets, then you go to step two. Step two is possibly redesign your product. Step two is maybe reselect the markets you're selling into. And so you look at product design and market selection. Once you've completed with step two, you go to step three. Step three is looking at the ad campaign, how to promote the product, make the customer aware that your products exist, and the pricing of your product, the pricing strategy, and the sales projection. And then lastly, once you're done, the last step is to look at your cash flow or your pro forma cash flow and ascertain, do you require additional sources of capital? So the simulation process is very simple and effectively follows what we do in industry. We monitor due diligence. We then manage a series of decisions: product, markets, marketing, cash flow, sources of funds. Specifically, and again, as I said, some of this is obviously very familiar to those of you who already looked at the videos, but once you start to look at the training videos, become acclimated and knowledgeable about the simulation, they'll become even more familiar with you. On our main screen, when you first log in to your screen, you are brought to your main screen, which has two major areas, if you will. The first one relates to the due dates, the milestones, if you will, of the simulation. And as you can see over here, the due dates. Now, again, you need to look at the information posted by Dr. Laskowski on Brightspace for your due dates. Now, this is important. These are the dates the simulation will be processed. That means you need to make your decisions by midnight of that date. Now, there is no, can I have an extension? There is no, can I redo? In business, businesses continuously operate 24 hours a day. What happened yesterday is yesterday. We can't go back to yesterday. And so the simulation emulates this continuous environment. So therefore, it is your responsibility, and you'll be held accountable for it, to make sure your decisions are entered by the specific milestone or quarterly due dates. The second element of your screen that is important for you to take a look at is what we call the growth and gap analysis. The growth analysis, after the first quarter has been processed, starts to provide you with information. It says, how well is my company expanding? And you can look at the expansion based on cash in bank. You can look at the expansion based on revenues, based on units sold, based on market share. But is my company improving? Is my company growing? And then the second part of that is to look at, if you will, the gap analysis. And what the gap analysis shows you is it tells you, is there an opportunity for me to pursue an accelerated growth? You'll eventually talk about in your class SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Well, a gap analysis is looking at potential opportunities you can pursue. So once you look at your growth, the next step is to look at the gaps and say, is there a way I can accelerate my growth? Now, this is the due diligence or monitoring portion of your managerial responsibility. Once you've analyzed this information, then you're going to proceed to make a series of managing decisions. That is, you may change your product, you may change your markets, you may revise some of this information. Now, how do you go about changing products? And again, not to explain in detail how you do this, that's what the training videos are for, but very simply, your product is composed of 5 features. Those features have a number of attributes associated with them, and those attributes give you information that is important. For example, the first attribute is cost. What is the cost of the item? The second attribute is suggested retail. When you look at the difference between retail and cost, you theoretically get a form of gross margin. Then you have a series of markets. In this case, the markets are labeled. In your case, they're called markets 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, what is important about that market? Well, what is important about that market is it has what we call a value proposition. If you notice a 7 and a 3, well, what does this tell us? Well, the simulation has created a numerical value associated with the satisfaction to the customer of that particular feature. That is, how desirable is it? What need does it satisfy? And the rank is 0 to 7. The value proposition is from 0 to 7. 0 means that product has absolutely no value, that feature, in the designated market. And as you can see, in this case, this first feature has absolutely no value whatsoever in that particular market. On the other hand, it has a 7, which tells us it is highly valuable. It is satisfying a tremendous need in the market. So when you start to design your product, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to design a product that gives you the highest possible value proposition, which could be 35, in your targeted markets. Now, you're not going to be able to achieve that in every market. You may not be able to even achieve it in your primary market. So how do you go about selecting your product features? Merely checking and unchecking the checkboxes, as you can see here. Check it implies that feature is in your product. A blank checkbox means it's not. So very simply, you'll select up to 5 of these features. And once you're done, you'll then select up to 3 of the potential markets. And what you'll end up with is you're going to get a result. And the result is going to allow you to see how well you've designed it. So for example, we go ahead and take a look at we're going to look at these results. And at the bottom of your product design screen, you're going to see the results. And as you can see on this screen, it shows us a number of different components. First of all, it shows us the current population of the market. It also shows us the market potential for the next quarter. So are we in a growth market? Are we in a contracting market? What kind of market are we in? It is important for us to understand that if we're going to design a product for a market, we want it to be a market that may be growing, or possibly a market that is remaining constant. The other element that we want to look at is we want to look at the value proposition of the product. What is the value proposition? Remember, knowing that the value proposition can be as high as 35. If we have a value proposition at 32, 33, we're doing very well. And if you notice in this case, we have a value proposition of 33, whereas the industry value is 18.25. So that means our product in market 2 is extremely valuable, much more valuable than most of the competitors. And that's the type of analysis we are going to perform. And again, this is an iterative process. We go back and forth between selecting product features and looking at the information at the in the results screens to see, are we designing a product that is going to be important to the particular customer? And again, depending upon our monitoring, the due diligence we've performed, we may wish to target market 3, even though it may not be the best in terms of population growth and so on. It may have other attributes that are important to us. So it's very important that we take a look at it. And once we do, we then end up designing, if you will, the specific product by selecting the various features and capabilities and looking at the results. So again, you'll get a much, much better understanding of this when you look at the training videos, and I'll show you a list of those at the end of our brief presentation. But it is important for you to get a general idea of the flow of what it is we're doing. Once you're done with the product design, if you will, and the market selection, the next step is to now craft an advertising campaign. Now, what is an advertising campaign? An advertising campaign is if you will, a multimedia approach to promoting your product. And remember, it is important to promote a product to make the customer aware of it. If you don't promote, no one knows who you are. If no one knows who you are, no one can buy your product. How do you create an advertising campaign? Well, there are up to 7 ad plans that you can select, and you can select up to 3 from those 7. The 3 ad plans that you have selected constitute an advertising campaign. And similar to the value proposition, there is an effectiveness to each and every one of these ad plans. A 0 effectiveness means no matter how much money you spend promoting the product, it will have no impact on making your product aware because the customer is not interested and doesn't look at that particular advertising plan. On the other hand, a 7 implies that the advertising campaign is extremely effective, and every dollar you spend will contact the right customer base. So think about it for a moment. I'm interested in selling sports cars. So would I advertise in a home and garden magazine? Probably not, because people who are looking at home and garden magazines are interested in home and garden products. So in that case, maybe it's a 0, maybe it's a 1, but it isn't the most effective. I would normally want to look at some type of car magazine and therefore advertise in that. Or I may want to advertise on television during an auto race and so on. So what you need to do, and very similar to the creation of your product design, the creation of your ad plans are based on checkboxes. You can check the box you're interested in and uncheck those that you're not. And you can select 3 out of the 7 that are there. Therefore, the most effective ad campaign you can have is 21. Well, like the product design, it is not necessarily possible to have an advertising campaign effectiveness of 21 in all markets. But what you can do is, and again, on this screen, you're going to see the market for the current quarter, the market growth for the next quarter that you have, your value proposition to give you an idea of how valuable your product is, the market average standard that's there, and when we want to take a look at the information that we see is the market prices. And that will give you an idea or baseline, if you will, on how to your pricing strategy, how to price your product. So the first step in marketing is to select up to 3 ad plans that are going to constitute your advertising campaign. Then your next step is to come down and to now enter promotional dollars. How much money do you wish to spend to promote your products in the 3 markets that you selected back on the product screen? And again, the idea is the more dollars you spend, the more awareness the customer population will have of your product. Then your third decision here is to determine the selling price. Now, the selling price may depend upon how many competitors are in your market. If you have a lot of competitors, you may want to be near the standard price, near the industry price. If you have few competitors, or your value proposition is extremely higher than the average, you may want to charge over the list price. So the decision is yours, what the pricing strategy is going to be. And then lastly, you're going to determine the forecast. How many units do you need to purchase to meet your sales projections? And so once you've done that, you're now done with, if you will, the marketing phase of your managerial process. And then you proceed to the cash flow. Now, this is a pro forma cash flow. Now, why is this called a pro forma cash flow? Well, it's called a pro forma cash flow simply because it isn't absolute. It isn't an actual yet. It hasn't occurred. Now, the only elements that are actuals or will occur are the expenses that you have. And so if you'll notice on our cash flow example here, we have a star next to potential revenue. This is merely a projection. It is a desire by the marketing manager to sell those number of units. Will you sell them? Maybe, maybe not. So the key is when you look at your cash flow, your objective as a financial manager is to ascertain how comfortable am I with the bottom line number. If the projection, the revenue projections represent 60% of my bottom line number in my cash flow, I need to be absolutely certain that that is going to be close to being true. If not, I'm going to have a negative cash in bank, which then creates problems. So if I am concerned about the bottom line number, then I go to my sources of cash. And you have two main sources of cash, debt and equity. Debt means you can borrow from a commercial bank, and you'll see whatever the interest rate is in the simulation. You can borrow from family, if you will, can borrow from credit cards, and the interest rates that are there. You can also sell equity, in ownership into the corporation at the current stock price. So to fund a business that is concerned about its operating capital, we use debt and equity to be able to do that. Lastly, you have an expense here called HR. And HR allows you to invest in the human capital of your corporation. This investment in the human capital will enhance your operations, it will enhance your marketing, but also it obviously increases your salary expense. So you need to look at that from a cost plus benefit analysis. Once you're done with your cash flow, that's it. You're finished for the quarter, all of your decisions, and you wait for the simulation to be processed. Once the simulation is processed, you then begin this flow again. Due diligence, product design, marketing in terms of ad campaign, and you may desire to make changes. You may make no changes at all. In most cases, you make minor changes unless you really have not achieved the result you wanted to. You go, you look at your cash flow, and you wait for the next quarter to be processed. Now, as you can see, this is what is on Brightspace for you. These are the due dates of the decisions, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. Then at the end of the semester, we're going to rerun the simulation on the first, second, third, and fourth, and we're going to do a comparison between the first 4 quarters and the second 4 quarters and see how much you've improved on it. So the idea behind it is these are the milestones. And so one of the important elements on the milestones is for you to look at item D on this list, student training materials. Make sure you complete the review of all of your student training materials by the due date shown on your specific syllabus and information that we have there. Just to review, you're going to go into your main screen. You're going to perform your due diligence. You're then going to go look at your product design and marketing screen, and via using the checkboxes, design, redesign the product, select, reselect the markets. You're then going to go into marketing, possibly redesign your ad campaign, change your promotional budgetary amounts, your price and your forecast, again, depending upon inventory that you may have. And then lastly, you're going to look at your debt and equity if sources of cash are needed in the simulation itself. And again, these are your steps. Look at this as a checklist: due diligence, product, marketing, cash flow. And this will be done every quarter. And this is your quarterly cycle. This is your managerial cycle. This is your managerial process. Now, it is important, as you notice, to complete by the date shown, looking at all of these videos that are on the student training site. Some of them are 3 minutes long, others are 15 minutes long. And so they really are intended to be viewed in the sequence that you see them scrolling through. They provide you with more in-depth, they provide you with strategic information, they provide you with more approaches that you may want to consider. Also on the student training site is a glossary of terms, which will help you understand some of the terminology that's used in the simulation. And in the training videos, there's a student guide, which is a hard copy that allows you to reflect, look at, highlight information. And then there's a vertical analysis, which gives you an idea of the differences between the verticals. But basically, this is an overview of the extensive amount of training information that is available to you on the Introduction to Business website. And so effectively, you have an overview. Now is the time to start to think of it as a learning period between now and the 11th to review, if you have not already done so, these various videos that are there and training tools to give you a much greater insight. And in some cases, you may have to review a video a second or a third time as you progress through the simulation. Remember the old adage, practice, practice, practice makes perfect. And that's really what we're trying to emulate, if you will, the learning process of a manager in a managerial training program. Okay.